So hi everyone, welcome to the next part of the Dune Imperium Ultimate Guide. In this part, I know previously I talking about combat VPs, but I decided to talk about combat and all its tactics. So here are some of the lessons learned I have from playing all the games I have of Dune. I decided to frame this guide in a slightly different manner, and this is in some sense my memoir of like the art of Dune War. So let's get started. Chapter 1. Combat is not a fight, it is an auction. So what do I mean by this, right? I think when you use the word combat, right, the implications of it is that when two people fight, there's a clear winner and a clear loser. People assume that when you win, right, is by putting in the most number of swords into the fight, and if you do, you win the fight. In some sense, you do, but what you should think about it, right? You should think about it as an auction. If I pay this amount of resources for it, like is it considered good? If I pay a little amount of resources for this reward, so I might pay a very small amount for like third place, and actually that might be considered a win for you, even though you in some sense lose the fight. But because it's an auction, you bid very little for a certain reward, it might be considered very good. So combat is not a fight, it's an auction. And it's an auction using a certain amount of resources, using troops in your garrison, as well as the troops that you obtain that turn by going to combat spaces. It is also based on the cards that you have bought and the daggers that you reveal for that round. I think treasury also counts because you can put in additional troops. And also is also paid for by intrigues and daggers that they have on these intrigues. So the more resources you have, the more you can bid in this auction. So combat is not a fight, it is an auction. In chapter 2, talk about in a bidding war, right, the winner is the one that does not participate. And so what I mean by this is that normally when two people are fighting, the person who wins, right, is the person who watches from the side. This is similar to like all types of fights, let's say alliances or fighting for alliances, but it's very prevalent in combat. So let's say if the combat is trade monopoly, where if you win you get 2 frayed icons and a troop, right? Red puts in 6 troops, green puts in 5 troops, right? In this case, green loses this combat, right? Assuming troops is all they have. He loses his combat because he puts in 5 troops and only he gets an intrigue and a water. In this case, yellow and blue both win in a manner. They win because the other players have wasted a lot of resources trying to get to first place, right? So red, in some sense, he wins, but he spent 6 troops to get 2 frayed icons and a troop. So you should also ask yourself, right, is this reward worth the investment that you have put in? Right? But the obvious winners to these is yellow, who gets third place with 1 troop, and blue, who sees that green and red use a lot of resources. Because they use a lot of resources, blue naturally wins. In chapter 3, I'll talk about 1 being infinitely bigger than 0, right? So the thing about putting 1 troop in, right, when you put in 1 troop, it doesn't matter how many swords someone else has on reveal, it doesn't matter what intrigues they have, as long as they do not have a troop into combat. And as such, there's a lot of times when 1 troop will give you some reward, right? It can give you second place or third place, sometimes even get you first place, depending on how the combat plays out. If you watch the last Sword Throne Invitational semi-final Group A Game 1, this is by GVX and Holy Boss, you see that on round 2, they get a very cheap combat. GVX puts in 1 troop, then after that, Holy Boss puts in 2 troops, and the other 2 players decide not to put in any troops at all. This battle for Imperial Basin in the end is won by Holy Boss with just 2 troops, and GVX gets 2 water for 1 troop. It's a very good result for them, and a lot of time, and it happens because they put in some troops. So 1 is infinitely bigger than 0. So in chapter 4, about when resources are low, the last to bid decides the price and the reward. So when I say last to bid, normally it's the person who takes the last action. And how do you get the last action? You get the last action through either getting the Mentat or getting Swordmaster. So this normally happens be it round 1 to round 3. The player who goes last, right, gets to see how much troops are put into combat, and he decides to bid the amount that gives him the right reward for the right price. So let's say if he sees that only 2 players have put in troops, he can put in 1 troop to get 3rd place cheaply. Or if the other players only put in 2 troops, he can put in 3 troops to get 1st place. Okay, so this happens quite a lot, and it's one of the advantages of being last to act. Sure, there are times when other people put in a lot of troops, you're unable to win, but very often you're able to very accurately price the reward with the amount of investment that you put in. And this is all dictated or all decided by being the last to put in troops. So this is one reason why Mentat in the early game is powerful, and why Swordmaster is one of the advantages of Swordmaster which people overlook at times. Chapter 5. When resources are low, the first to overbid wins. So this happens in about 80% of the time, but in some cases, in some cases you can overbid and lose. But most of the time, when everyone has low resources, so meaning early rounds with regards to Hardy Warriors, the first person to put in Hardy Warriors, 2 troops from playing a water and then 2 troops from Garrison, normally they win the combat. And I say not normally because it's not always happens, but generally it happens. Okay, so when resources are low, first to overbid will win. And this happens sometime in the mid game also with Highliner, when you put in 5 troops, or maybe 6 or 7, right? Because you overbid, it heavily disincentivizes other people to come and chase you. And if they do, you can always react by putting in more troops. So the only time this doesn't apply, right, is that if you do not have intrigues. If you do not have intrigues, sometimes other players, if they do have combat intrigues, they can accurately see how much resources you have put in, and if they know that they can accurately beat you, they might still come and chase you. But most of the time, when resources are low, the first player to overbid will win. And chapter 6, when resources are high, it's no longer an auction, it becomes a race. And what I mean by this is that in tier 3 combats, right, it's no longer about who has the most resources, because if everyone has a lot of resources, right, one thing about Dune Imperium is that you're limited by how much resources you can put in based on the combat spaces that are available, right? So Highliner lets you put in 7 troops, but most city spaces only let you put in 3 troops, right? So as such, the person who can Highliner at a crucial time generally wins the later combats. There are things that defy this, like maybe being able to ship down in a combat space or being able to get the Emperor bump. But in general, when it comes to round 7, right, it's a race to Highliner if you want to win the combat. Assuming that resources are high, assuming you have full garrison and intrigue cards. And that's actually the end of my manuscript. So I hope this was useful to you. I think this has come through a lot of games of Dune, and I think the more you play, the more this will make sense to you. But I added in this chapter 0 that if you didn't learn anything from this is one thing you should take away. That if you did not learn anything from this, always put in 1 troop when you can. I think this is the best thing you can do, and the combats that you want to win, you just put in everything. But if not, just put in one troop most of the time. Okay, so I hope this guide was helpful to you and it makes sense. It's very different from the rest of the videos, but if any questions, do put it in the comments. And this is The Art of War by Cheesable. See you around.